Colonel Vivian Ashford exuded a quiet power in Richmond, her hometown. For years, her mere presence commanded respect, even out of uniform. But to Sergeant Kyle Brennan and Officer Derek Brennan, she seemed just another black woman behind the wheel, someone easy to intimidate. They approached arrogantly, their flashlights reflecting off the car's body and in her eyes, each word dripping with contempt. "Documents and driver's license," they demanded, laughing, certain they could bend anyone with a uniform and the right tone of voice to their will. Then came the shove, dry, deliberate, the metallic sound pounding in the silence of the street. Their laughter echoed, confident that they would remain unpunished as always. But what they didn't realize was what lay behind that firm gaze. 30 years of command, 4 stars of merit, and a lifetime dedicated to the United States Army. That woman was not a victim. She was a soldier, a strategist, a commander. They thought she would lower her head. They were completely wrong. With a single phone call to the Department of Defense, the game changed. And in the hours that followed, the Brennan brothers would learn the true weight of hierarchy and of justice. Before we continue this story, please comment on which city or country you are watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. This is just the first twist in a story that will surprise you. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Magnolia Avenue as the official U.S. Army vehicle slowly sped through Richmond, her hometown. Colonel Vivian Ashford's immaculate uniform reflected the golden light, looking more like armor than a uniform. People on the sidewalks watched in silence, some with admiration, others with the same veiled disdain she had known since childhood. The old buildings, the worn facades, and the rusty lampposts seemed to resist time with the same stubbornness as the city's refusal to change. When she arrived at St. Joseph's funeral home, the parking lot was already full. Vivian took a deep breath, adjusted her general stars, and got out of the vehicle. The sound of polished boots on the gravel preceded her arrival, and within seconds a murmur spread through the stuffy hall. "It's Colonel Vivian Ashford, the one who reached 4 stars. It seems she's forgotten where she came from," someone whispered between the rows. In the center of the room, the body of Mrs. Eleanor Ashford rested in a dark wooden coffin surrounded by white roses. Vivian kept her chin raised, her gaze fixed, her steps measured. 30 years of command had taught her to read the atmosphere like one reads a battlefield, and here, once again, the divisions were clear. On one side, the Black Ladies of Hope Baptist Church watched with quiet pride. On the other, members of the local white elite whispered amongst themselves, feigning courtesy. "Miss..." Aunt Gloria Ashford's trembling voice broke the silence as she opened her arms. The frail body seemed even smaller than Vivian remembered, but the embrace had the same strength as always, enough to make tears sting the colonel's eyes. "I'm here, Aunt. I'm here now," Vivian murmured. "Oh, your mother would be so proud," said Gloria, stepping back to look at her. "Look at you, so important, covered in medals. She kept all the clippings about you, even that huge Time magazine article." Vivian smiled despite the pain. "She called me that day, remember? Screaming so loudly I thought something had happened. Then she told me she bought all the copies of Central Pharmacy." The moment was interrupted by the approach of Pastor Samuel Hayes, with hesitant steps and his collar too tight. "Colonel Ashford," he greeted, extending his hand. "Welcome back, even amidst the pain." "Thank you, Pastor," Vivian replied firmly, "and thank you for being with my mother until the end." He looked around, carefully choosing his words. "May I speak with you, in private?" Vivian followed him to a discreet corner, away from the whispers and curious glances. "The atmosphere here is delicate," the pastor began, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Things are in balance, so to speak." Vivian's jaw clenched. Balance on whose back, Pastor? That's exactly what I mean, he murmured, looking towards the pale faces on the other side of the room. Your mother knew when to speak, and when... He hesitated. When will you accept injustice? Vivian finished coldly. Please, Colonel, for everyone's sake, pay your respects and return to Washington. Don't cause any trouble. Vivian stepped forward. Her voice was low but firm as steel. My mother taught me that silence in the face of injustice is a sin. Perhaps you have forgotten that lesson. The service was an exact reflection of what the pastor feared, a visible, painful division. The faithful separated themselves by skin color, as if obeying an invisible law. From the podium, Vivian spoke with a firm voice, talking about her mother's strength and dignity and how she dared to teach black history in schools when it was still forbidden. The ladies in the church wept quietly. The white men, uneasy, exchanged uncomfortable glances. After the final amen, Vivian hugged her aunt and promised to visit her later. The drive to her mother's house was a journey through her own history. She passed through Liberty Square, where there used to be signs prohibiting black children from playing. By Joe's Diner, which until recently served black customers through the back door. And by the Richmond County Courthouse, where Mrs. Eleanor had protested against the manipulation of the ballot boxes during the city's darkest times. The house, a simple and old building, still stood with dignity. Vivian parked, took a deep breath and looked at the light blue painted gate. This house knows our history, her mother used to say. Every crack, every creak has our voice. Lost in her memories, Vivian only realized the danger when the blue flash blinked in the rearview mirror. The police car approached slowly, its headlights reflecting in his face. And in a few seconds, the reunion with the past would give way to something much darker. Colonel Vivian Ashford's hands gripped the steering wheel as the patrol car's siren sounded once, ordering her to pull over. Years of discipline in the United States Army kept her movements controlled, each gesture marked by a trained calm. Even so, her mind was already racing through protocols, procedures, risks. The sunset tinged Magnolia Avenue with orange and purplish hues, while Vivian watched in the rearview mirror as the vehicle door opened. The mother's words echoed like an ancient warning. Daughter, in this city, you need to be twice as careful and 3 times as strong. She kept her hands visible on the steering wheel, the military document resting on the dashboard, her face serene, a mask forged by decades of command. When she stepped out of the official vehicle, her steps were firm, each movement calculated. The night air was heavy, damp, and thick with the scent of jasmine emanating from a nearby garden. Vivian maintained her upright posture, her spine rigid, and her voice low but sharp. Good evening, gentlemen. The twilight light reflected off her decorations as she displayed her military identification. Sergeant Kyle Brennan was the first to approach, with an air of superiority that mixed mockery and nonchalance. His hand rested casually on the gun in its holster, as if savoring the power of fear. Behind him, Officer Derek Brennan widened his stance, assuming an aggressive posture, all too familiar to Vivian. It was the posture of someone seeking confrontation. Look what we have here, Kyle said with a half smile. Another speeding driver thinking she's an authority. Colonel Vivian Ashford, United States Army, she replied, maintaining a professional tone. 4-star general, currently assigned to the Department of Defense in Washington. My identification is on the dashboard, along with the vehicle's documents. Derek's laughter cut through the heavy air. Listen to this, Kyle. Colonel Ashford. He made air quotes with his fingers. It must be some kind of joke. Kyle ignored the identification and took a step forward. Move away from the vehicle, ma'am. With what justification? Vivian asked, motionless. I'd like to know the reason for the approach. Kyle's face hardened, his voice stiffened. That's contempt. You're resisting orders. Before she could respond, he grabbed her arm brutally and spun her around, pinning her against the hood of the police car. The impact reverberated throughout Vivian's body, but she didn't make a sound. "You're making a serious mistake," he said through gritted teeth. "I suggest you contact your superior immediately." "Shut up!" Derek growled, grabbing her other arm. "The police are in charge here, not your station." Across the street, people began to stop. A woman raised her cell phone, discreetly recording. Kyle noticed and pointed at her. "Hey, put that phone down now, or you're going down with us." But the woman didn't back down. Derek lunged forward furiously, snatched the device from her hand, and threw it forcefully to the ground, crushing it with his boot. "Anyone else want to try their luck?" he shouted, turning towards the small, growing crowd. Vivian's military training screamed inside her, the instinct to defend herself, the readiness, but she knew this wasn't the right time. This was not a battlefield of weapons and uniforms. It was a different kind of war, the war of appearances against truth. Kyle grabbed her hair, pulling her head back. "You think you're special, is that it? You think you can go back to your city, thinking you're better than everyone else?" The pain exploded when he violently pushed her to the ground. The impact took her breath away, and before she could react, Derek's boot struck her ribs. "Not so powerful now, huh?" he mocked, delivering another kick. "Shame on your uniform." The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth, but Vivian maintained her composure. His steady gaze swept across the crowd, the frightened faces, those who looked away, those who seemed almost fascinated by the scene. The shadows of night stretched across the street, but there was enough light to see everything and everyone. Kyle knelt down, pressing his knee against his back as he handcuffed his wrists with unnecessary force. "Do you know what your problem is?" he whispered in her ear. "You forgot your seat." "Every action of yours is being witnessed," Vivian replied, her voice trembling but firm, "and recorded. Every illegal move." Derek let out a nervous laugh, and for a moment hesitated. More cell phones were being raised, this time from all sides. Kyle noticed and shouted, "Anyone else recording this is going to jail!" He grabbed Vivian by the arms, dragging her along. Her uniform was now soiled, her face marked, blood trickling from her lip. But she still walked upright, her gaze fixed, intact, in what no one could break, her dignity. The crowd parted in silence as the Brennan brothers led her to the police car. Vivian recognized familiar faces, people who had applauded at her mother's funeral hours earlier. Now they looked away, and in that instant she knew. The city that once saw her leave as a heroine now received her as a threat. Some older black residents stepped forward, ready to intervene, but Colonel Vivian Ashford merely shook her head subtly. That wasn't their battle. Not yet. Officer Derek Brennan opened the back door of the patrol car with unnecessary force. "Come in, Colonel," he said, pushing her so that her head hit the metal doorframe. Through the window, Vivian watched her hometown plunge into twilight. The lights on the balconies came on, casting yellow patches on the old facades, and the street grew increasingly silent. The witnesses, who minutes before had been murmuring indignantly, began to disperse. They turned their backs as if denying what they had just seen. The kind of silence that sticks in the conscience. The car's engine roared loudly. In the front seat, Kyle and Derek Brennan exchanged knowing glances and brief smiles of satisfaction. They didn't realize that Vivian's eyes, behind the dirty glass, remained alert and calculating. She discreetly tested the handcuffs, assessed the pain in her ribs, the bleeding on her lip, registering each sensation with surgical precision. His face remained serene. It wasn't fear, it wasn't a defeat, it was the disciplined patience of someone who had learned to wait for the exact moment to act. As the vehicle pulled away from the sidewalk, the last ray of sunlight fell upon the stars on his uniform, still shining, even covered in dust and blood. In that light there was a promise, not of revenge, but of justice. The kind of justice that shakes an entire city to its foundations. The cell was small, perhaps 2.5 meters by 3. The walls, scrawled with names and dates, smelled of mold and bleach. A steel vise occupied the corner, and a fluorescent lamp flickered on the ceiling, casting long shadows on the cold cement floor. Vivian sat with the same posture she maintained at military graduations. Her ribs ached with each breath, but her spine remained straight. The sound of boots echoed down the hallway. Officer Derek Brennan appeared, twirling keys with feigned nonchalance. He leaned against the bars, a mocking smile plastered on his young face. "Comfortable in there, Colonel?" He uttered the title as a provocation. "Quite different from your office in Washington, isn't it?" Vivian didn't answer. She just watched him, cold, analytical. He noticed the slight tremor in her hands, the quick averting of her eyes whenever she looked directly at him. "What happened? Did you lose your commanding voice?" he taunted, banging his baton against the bars. The metallic sound echoed, cutting through the silence of the police station. "I'd like to make my call now," Vivian said calmly, her lips still bleeding. "It's my right." Derek smiled with a hint of irony. "Oh, so now you want to talk about rights? You should have thought about that before resisting the approach." "The call, Officer Brennan," she said, pronouncing the name slowly and firmly. The memory that she knew exactly who he was made his tone waver. "Or would you prefer that I add the denial of basic rights to the report that will be delivered to command?" Derek tried to laugh, but the sound came out forced. "What report is this?" "The phone, please." For a moment he hesitated. Then he shrugged, trying to regain his arrogance. "That's fine, but try something funny and you'll regret it." He unlocked the cell. Vivian stood up slowly, ignoring the pain that cut through her right side, and followed him to a landline phone near the reception area. Richmond Central Police Station was nearly empty. 2 officers behind the counter pretended to fill out paperwork, but they watched her every move. Derek crossed his arms and leaned against the table. "You can call your lawyer in Washington. It won't change anything here." Vivian picked up the phone and dialed a number from memory, each ring calculated. The line rang twice. "General Patricia Hartwell, Department of Defense," a firm voice replied. "General, this is Colonel Vivian Ashford," she said, with the calm of someone reporting a routine operation. "I apologize for calling at this hour, ma'am." "Vivian, what happened?" Patricia asked, her voice immediately tense. "I am being held at the Richmond Central Police Station following a police stop." There was excessive use of force on the part of Officers Kyle and Derek Brennan. "I have injuries, civilian witnesses, and I suspect that the recordings from the police car cameras may be compromised." She spoke slowly, knowing that Derek was listening to every word. "I recommend immediate attention from legal counsel and possibly intervention from the Regional Army Command to review the facts and abuses of authority committed." The policeman's face lost its color. Patricia responded directly. "Is she injured?" "Affirmative, ma'am. Chest and facial injuries, but stable. I request communication with the Police Internal Affairs Department and the national press." The silence that followed was cutting. Derek swallowed hard. Patricia concluded, "Understood. Stay where you are, Colonel. In less than 20 minutes, nobody in this police station will be in charge." Vivian gently returned the phone to the hook. The sound of the click echoed through the hall. And for the first time that night, it was Derek who looked away. Officer Derek Brennan was staring at her now, and for the first time seemed to truly see. He saw not just an injured woman or a dirty uniform, but the full weight of the authority he had dared to defy. "Give me 30 minutes, said the firm voice on the other end of the line. "And don't tell anyone else," ordered General Patricia Hartwell. "Understood, ma'am. Thank you." Colonel Vivian Ashford hung up the phone with deliberate care, the dry click echoing through the silence of the Richmond Central Police Station. Derek tried to regain his arrogance. "Is this supposed to scare us? A call to your friends at the barracks?" "No, Officer Brennan," Vivian replied, slowly turning to face him. "This was just standard procedure, and the justice system usually acts quite efficiently when a decorated colonel is assaulted by police officers on duty." Before he could answer, the main phone at the police station started ringing. Lieutenant Howard Mitchell, a burly man with an impassive face, answered with irritation. His expression changed in seconds, from boredom to confusion, and then to pure terror. "Yes, sir. I understand." The secretary herself. He covered the phone with his hand and, his voice trembling, ordered, "Brennan, take the handcuffs off her now." Immediately, Derek searched for the keys with trembling hands, sweat trickling down his forehead. The sound of metal rang out loudly as the handcuffs opened. Other phones started ringing in sequence, creating a symphony of escalating chaos. Police officers jostled each other to respond to calls, exchanging nervous glances. "It was just a big misunderstanding," Mitchell said, trying to smile. "We'll settle this, Colonel Ashford. No charges. These lads sometimes get carried away." Derek swallowed hard. This doesn't need to go any further, right? No hard feelings," he murmured, too afraid to look at her. Vivian remained silent, and it was precisely the silence that made them squirm. The police station was plunged into hushed despair as calls from Washington, the Department of Defense, and national newspapers flooded the lines. She heard scattered fragments. "Yes, Madam Minister. No, it was never our intention. Of course, we respect the Army." Lieutenant Mitchell escorted her to the door, bowing in apology. Behind them, Derek Brennan walked with his head down, as if carrying the weight of his own mistake on his shoulders. "Your vehicle will be delivered to your residence, Colonel. Sanitized, serviced at no cost. And if you need anything..." Vivian stopped in the doorway. All eyes turned to her. Despite her uniform being stained with blood and dust, she stood erect, proud, imposing. He didn't need to say anything. His silence spoke louder than any speech, and then she went out into the night, her firm footsteps echoing on the steps of the police station. Only when he reached the empty parking lot did he allow himself to take a deep breath, the cold air burning his bruised ribs. He felt blood trickle from the corner of his mouth and wiped it away with the back of his hand. But he kept his head held high. That battle was over. But the war was only just beginning. The following morning dawned clear and damp, typical of Richmond in the summer. The sun streamed through the windows of Mrs. Eleanor Ashford's old house, illuminating the mirror in which Vivian adjusted her freshly pressed uniform. The purplish bruise on his face contrasted sharply with the flawless shine of his medals. No amount of makeup would be enough to hide that. And deep down, she didn't even want to. They should see what the police did. The cell phone vibrated on the dresser. Message from Mayor Nathan Caldwell's office. Press conference. 9 a.m. sharp, Richmond City Hall. Your presence is required. Unsolicited. Necessary. Vivian's jaw clenched. He knew exactly what that meant. Control of the narrative. Richmond City Hall was a white building with old columns dominating the central square. Before it, the monument to the founders of the city still stood proudly, a silent reminder of a story told only from one side. As Vivian climbed the steps, the reporters surged forward like a wave. "Colonel Ashford, did you resist arrest? Do you intend to file a complaint against the Brennan officers? Is the Department of Defense going to intervene in the Virginia Police Department?" She kept her step steady, her gaze fixed. The cameras captured every movement, every detail of the clean uniform contrasting with the bruised face. In the marble lobby, Mayor Nathan Caldwell waited with a forced smile. Beside him stood Police Chief Vincent Thornton, his face tense and his gaze cold. "Colonel Ashford," the mayor said to the cameras, "thank you for joining us. On behalf of the city, I want to apologize for yesterday's unfortunate incident." He extended his hand, the gold ring gleaming under the flashes. Vivian looked at her for a second that was far too long before squeezing her, firmly, without warmth. More cameras went off. "We are here to reaffirm our complete confidence in justice and respect for the armed forces," the mayor announced, turning slightly to ensure his profile was in the frame. Chief Thornton finished in a dry voice. "There was a procedural error. The officers involved have been suspended and are under investigation." The journalists were frantically taking notes. Vivian watched how Caldwell moved, calculated, theatrical, always at the center of the image. "Well," he said, maintaining a tense smile, "if you'll excuse us, the colonel and I have some private matters to discuss." He gestured for her to accompany him to his office, and as the doors closed behind them, Vivian knew the real press conference was yet to come, and she would be the one to lead the entire country to hear the truth. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind them with a muffled click, drowning out the murmur of journalists in the hallway. Mayor Nathan Caldwell's office exuded power and something rotten, leather, mahogany, and the sweet smell of cigars, even though smoking was prohibited there. Police Chief Vincent Thornton entered shortly afterward, positioning himself by the window. His broad frame blocked half the light coming from outside. The instant the door closed, the mayor's rehearsed smile vanished. "Sit down, Vivian." "I prefer to remain standing, Mr. Mayor." Caldwell let out a sigh, heavy with contempt. As stubborn as her mother, that's what got her into trouble too. Colonel Vivian Ashford's eyes narrowed, but her voice retained the firmness of a military command. "Is there any real purpose to this meeting besides the photo op, Mayor?" "The purpose," Thornton growled from the window, "is to prevent you from destroying Richmond with your threats to the Department of Defense and your stories of persecution." "Stories?" Vivian stared at him intently. "You mean allegations of corruption and police brutality? That's not destroying the city, boss. It's cleaning it up." The mayor leaned over the table, resting his elbows and clasping his hands as if delivering a sermon. "Look, Colonel, we all want what's best for Richmond. It's a peaceful, thriving city. Do you really want to put all that at risk because of a misunderstanding?" "Misunderstanding?" Vivian's voice could have frozen the air. "Two of your officers assaulted a U.S. Army officer, destroyed evidence, and violated the Constitution. This is not a misunderstanding, Mr. Mayor. This is a crime." "Those boys were punished," Thornton replied curtly. "Let it die here." "How could you let the other complaints against your department die?" Vivian's gaze was like a blade. "How many victims have you buried in silence, boss? How many black citizens have been humiliated and forgotten?" Caldwell's face darkened. "Be careful, Vivian. Your family has roots here. Your mother's house, the church she was a member of, her reputation. It would be a shame to see all of that compromised." "Is that a threat, Mr. Mayor?" "It's a warning," he replied with feigned serenity. "Things can get complicated for those who don't understand how this city works. Taxes can go up, inspections can happen, and police response times can vary." Vivian took 2 firm steps to the table and placed her hands on the mahogany top. Both men stiffened. "Let me clarify something, gentlemen. I've faced drug traffickers, militiamen and warlords. I commanded troops in conflict zones under live fire. If they think they can intimidate me with petty games, it's because they haven't the slightest idea who they're dealing with." "No one is trying to intimidate anyone," the mayor stammered, now without the same firmness. "We're just talking about civic harmony." "This conversation is over." Vivian straightened up, her uniform still immaculate even after the long mourning. And a word of advice: document everything you own. You'll need this inventory when the FBI and the Department of Justice arrive. She turned and left, leaving behind a dense silence and two petrified figures. The reporters tried to surround her again, but Vivian passed through them, as if walking through smoke. He didn't say a word. The sound of the flashes seemed distant, like rain hitting closed windows. The journey to Oakwood Cemetery was almost automatic. She needed to visit her mother, to find strength in the woman who taught her never to back down. But as he turned onto the main avenue, he felt his stomach clench. Mrs. Eleanor Ashford's gravestone was covered in red paint. Grotesque words and racial insults scratched the granite like open wounds. The funeral flowers had been torn up, scattered and trampled. On the lawn, someone had angrily carved, "Go away." Vivian's knees buckled. She fell before the desecrated tomb, her hands digging into the damp earth. All the military discipline, all the self-control built up over decades, crumbled there. A guttural sound escaped his throat, half a sob, half a roar of pain and fury. She stared at the painted words, and in them she saw the exact portrait of what she was fighting against, the cowardly hatred that survives hidden behind uniforms, positions, and public smiles. Mrs. Eleanor's kitchen hadn't changed in 30 years. The yellow curtains, the wallpaper with faded roosters, the same wall clock that stopped every winter. Aunt Gloria Ashford moved through the space with domestic efficiency, serving dishes of fried chicken and sautéed kale. "You barely touched your food, girl," she said, watching Vivian twirl her fork listlessly. "Your mother would kill me if she saw you like this." "I can't eat, Aunt. Not after what they did to Mom's grave." Gloria's calloused hands trembled as she poured more sweet tea. "I heard Pastor Samuel Hayes is putting together a team to clean everything up early tomorrow morning." She leaned back in her chair, exhausted. "But my daughter, that's precisely why you should leave. These people are dangerous. They always have been." "So we just let them win?" Vivian asked, her voice calm but firm. "Are we going to let them continue humiliating us?" "I've lived here for 74 years, Vivian," said Gloria, staring into space. "I taught 3 generations of children in separate schools. I know what happens when we push too hard, too fast. They burned down the Williams Market in 1965 simply because the owner hired black boxes." The silence that followed was dense, almost palpable. The teaspoon clinked slowly against the cup, as if marking the time that City pretended had not passed. And Vivian, motionless, stared at the steam rising from the cup, her face reflected in the window pane, half light, half shadow, knowing that from that point on, there was no turning back. They shot Thomas Porter's son simply because he was registering voters in 1972. Aunt Gloria Ashford's voice faltered, and the words hung in the heavy air of the kitchen. "I can't bear to see you suffer, my daughter." Colonel Vivian Ashford reached across the table, touching her aunt's wrinkled fingers. "I understand your fear, Aunt Gloria, but I'm not that little girl anymore. I commanded battalions, led missions, and learned to fight intelligently. This isn't like your wars, Vivian." The aunt's voice trembled between reason and terror. "There are no rules here. There's no Geneva Convention. These people, they're going to—" A knock on the back door interrupted the sentence. They both looked at each other in silence, until a familiar voice called out, "Mrs. Gloria, it's Dylan Monroe." Gloria hurried to unlock the door. The man entered with his Richmond Chronicle badge still hanging around his neck. He carried the urgency of someone with a hot story to tell. Dylan had gained weight since high school, with grey hairs in his beard, but his eyes retained the same curious glint of someone who always wanted to understand and expose what others tried to hide. "Vivian Ashford," he smiled, opening his arms. "Still causing earthquakes, it seems." Vivian stood up to hug him. Dylan Monroe, the reporter who never sleeps. Speaking of stories. He pulled a thick envelope from his backpack and spread a stack of documents across the table, pushing the dinner plates aside. I've been investigating police misconduct here in Richmond for years. Look at these patterns. Vivian leaned over the papers. There were hospital reports, copies of police reports, obituaries, names and dates. Her eyes scanned each line with the precision of someone reading war reports. Multiple fractures, head injuries, deaths in confrontation with no weapon seized. Dylan pointed with his finger. They falsify reports, intimidate witnesses, but now I have sources within the police department itself. People who are waiting for someone like you, someone who cannot be silenced. Aunt Gloria squeezed the dishcloth in her hands. Dylan Monroe, don't go putting dangerous ideas in her head. This town doesn't forgive those who stir up a hornet's nest. With all due respect, Mrs. Gloria, he replied, that's exactly what they want, for us to be afraid, to run away. They survive by feeding off the silence of good people. Vivian continued flipping through the reports until she stopped in front of a photograph. A young black man, his face swollen and bloody, lay in a hospital bed. When was this? 3 months ago, Dylan said. The official report states that he fell down the stairs during an arrest. But the doctors told me a different story. It was the same 2 policemen who assaulted you, the Brennan brothers, the police chief's henchmen. Aunt Gloria touched her niece's shoulder. Daughter, please. Your mother wouldn't want you getting involved in this. Vivian raised her eyes, her voice firm. My mother would want justice. A heavy silence fell over the table. She spent 30 years watching this city break people's spirits. Teaching everyone to lower their heads, to stay quiet, to survive. But surviving is no longer enough. She stacked the documents carefully, forming a neat block. I didn't fight warlords in the Middle East to surrender here, in my own land. Not when the enemy wears a uniform and signs decrees. Dylan picked up the keys to the silver sedan he had left on the porch. I have more files in my office. Internal records, filed complaints, reports from the Internal Affairs Department. We can start connecting the dots today. Aunt Gloria gripped her niece's arm with surprising force. At least wait until dawn. These roads are dangerous at night. Vivian smiled tenderly. Darkness is exactly what we need, Aunt. That's when the truth comes out. She kissed her aunt's cheek. Lock everything up after we leave, and don't worry. I've learned to protect my back in war zones. The night air was thick and damp, the sound of crickets mingling with the distant crackle of thunder. Vivian and Dylan walked to the car, the gravel crunching under their shoes. The streetlight cast long shadows across her mother's garden, the same garden where, as a child, Vivian dreamed of a world bigger than the limits of that city. Are you sure about this? Dylan asked, starting the car. As soon as we start digging, they'll come at us with everything they've got. Vivian tightened her belt and looked ahead, her posture impeccable, even out of uniform. Let them come. I have 30 years of tactical experience and a few stars on my shoulder. They have power, Dylan murmured. Power based on fear. That's what makes them dangerous. Fear makes them careless, Vivian corrected coldly. And careless enemies make mistakes. The sedan pulled slowly from the sidewalk, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The trees cast sinuous shadows on the narrow road, and the distant sound of a train echoed through the sleeping city. You knew your mother would be proud, right? Dylan said, cautiously turning the corner. To see you standing like that. I know, Vivian replied, staring at the road. That's why they're so afraid of me. Because I am my mother's daughter, and this time I have the power to make them pay. The first rays of dawn tinged the steps of the Richmond Federal Courthouse with gold as Vivian climbed the stairs, the sound of her shoes echoing on the worn marble. The building loomed before her like an aged giant, a monument to the selective justice of a still divided country. Behind her, Dylan Munro held the briefcase of documents against her chest. And together, at that dawn, they were about to open the wound that the entire city pretended didn't exist. At the top of the federal court staircase, a young woman in a navy blue suit paced back and forth, speaking firmly on the phone. "No. Tell the witness that we can guarantee protection, yes, but she needs to trust us." Colonel Vivian Ashford and Dylan Munro were approaching when the young woman interrupted the call upon recognizing them. "I'll be back later. Colonel Ashford." She extended her hand with determination. "I'm Dr. Claire Donovan. Dylan called me last night." Vivian shook her hand, observing the lawyer's determined look and firm grip. "You're the lawyer who's been filing lawsuits against the Richmond Police Department, aren't you?" "I've been trying," Claire replied with a tired half-smile. "But the cases disappear, literally. Federal Judge Linda Warren always has an excuse. Incorrect filing, incomplete documentation." She pulled a bunch of keys from her blazer pocket. "Luckily, I interned here during college. I know where they hide the bodies." She blinked. "Metaphorically, I hope." He led them through a side entrance of the building, a nearly empty corridor where the morning light streamed in through the blinds, cutting through the air in streaks of suspended dust. The basement smelled of mold and old paper. Rows of metal shelves stretched out like corridors in a forgotten labyrinth. "The cases we want are here, if they still exist," said Claire, unlocking a room with a rusty key. Dylan sneezed. "Some of these files are over 20 years old." Vivian picked up a folder labeled Police Report, Jordan Miles, 2003. Inside, there were photos of a black teenager, deep marks on his neck, and a report that classified the cause of death as accidental asphyxiation during an arrest. "I remember this case," Vivian murmured. "His mother taught classes with my mother. The police said the boy choked. Look at the signature on the coroner's report." Claire pointed with her pen. "Dr. Charles Caldwell." Vivian looked up, her face hardening. "Caldwell, as Mayor Nathan Caldwell," Dylan confirmed, nodding his head. "The same family. They control everything: the police, the medical examiner's office, registry offices, construction companies, judges. It's a dynasty that has ruled this city since the times of segregation." They spread more folders across the table. Patterns began to emerge. Repeated names, identical signatures, absurd official versions. It was like watching a map of a web of corruption unfold before them. "Look at this one," said Claire, holding up a more recent folder. "Sarah Mitchell, 2015, suicide in police custody." She opened the envelope carefully. "But look at these photos. Bruises on the forearms, defensive wounds. None of that fits with hanging." "The police officer in charge of the investigation?" Vivian asked. Claire took a deep breath. "Sergeant Kyle Brennan," and he pointed to the attached file. "His partner, Officer Derek Brennan." Vivian's gaze turned as cold as steel. The same people who had assaulted her weeks before. Dylan flipped through another file. "Shooting in 2018, suspect armed according to the report. Except the victim was a 60-year-old man who used a cane." "How many cases like this are there?" Vivian asked in a low, cutting tone. 15 deaths in custody since 2000, Claire replied. "Not to mention dozens of assaults that are never reported. Most victims don't report it out of fear. Those who try disappear. And who tries to expose them?" Dylan added. "A police officer tried to report the Brennans in 2016. 2 days later they found drugs in his locker. He's still in jail." Vivian picked up a photo from the newspaper. In it, Mayor Nathan Caldwell appeared smiling, with his hand on Sergeant Kyle Brennan's shoulder, handing him a medal. The caption read, "Honor for exemplary service to public safety." "The mayor isn't just covering up crimes," said Vivian, her voice controlled. "He's rewarding his own henchmen, building a private army with public money." Claire nodded. "I tracked the funds. Part of it came from a federal citizen safety program aimed at prevention and community policing. But the money was used to buy tactical weapons, drones, and surveillance equipment. They are arming themselves, not against crime, but against the population. Then let's give them what they're looking for, Vivian said, lowering her voice. A war, but the right kind, fought with documents, testimonies, and the truth. We need people willing to testify, Dylan reminded them. Witnesses, physical evidence, something that cannot disappear. I have names, he said, opening the notebook. People who have been waiting for years to speak out, but they need real protection. I can arrange that, Vivian replied. I have contacts in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice and friends in Washington who owe me favors. If they come with me, nothing will touch them. Claire began gathering the most incriminating files into a sturdy folder. I'll prepare the petitions. Once we file the case in federal jurisdiction, they won't be able to make it disappear. Be careful, Dylan warned. If they find out we have copies, relax, Claire interrupted, giving the folder a light pat. I have encrypted backups in 3 different clouds, and I learned my lesson after my old office was accidentally flooded. The trio climbed the stairs back up to the main floor. Outside, the court was beginning to wake up. Lawyers rushing about, clerks opening windows, the smell of fresh coffee wafting through the hallways. But there, among yellowed papers and faded names, something had changed. For the first time in decades, the truth had witnesses. And with Colonel Vivian Ashford at the helm, Richmond was about to discover what happens when power loses control of the narrative. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the federal courthouse, causing clouds of dust to dance in the air like tiny golden flakes. "Meet me in my office at noon," said Dr. Claire Donovan, putting the files away in the leather folder. "I'll have the initial paperwork ready. We can begin the witness interviews this afternoon." Outside, the humid air enveloped them like a heavy blanket. Colonel Vivian Ashford glanced automatically at the street, a habit she had worn for decades in war zones. A black sedan with tinted windows was parked on the other side of the square. "Dylan," she said softly, "that car was in front of his office last night." He glanced at it, without turning his face completely. No front license plate. And I recognized the dent in the rear bumper. I've been seeing this car frequently lately. Claire sighed. They don't even try to hide it anymore. They want us to know we're being watched. Vivian stared at the car with half-closed eyes. Great, let them see, let them know what we're doing. By the time they realize what kind of war they've gotten themselves into, it will be too late. Vivian's old pickup truck moved slowly down Maple Street, a forgotten thoroughfare lined with simple houses with peeling paint. Claire was reviewing her notes in the passenger seat. Daniel Nash lives at the end of the street, number 1247. 30 years at the same address, before the attacks left him in a wheelchair. They stopped in front of a small yellow house, its paint faded by time, and a makeshift wooden ramp leading up to the porch. The wind chimes tinkled softly, a sweet sound contrasting with the tension that hung in the air. Dylan said that Daniel was a deacon at the First Baptist Church of Richmond, Vivian commented, getting out of the car. He was teaching Sunday school with my mother, Eleanor, before 3 police officers destroyed his spine during an arrest. And they even accused him of assaulting a police officer, Claire added, closing the folder. Vivian's knuckles turned white as she gripped her cane, a temporary consequence of the brutal attack by the Brennan brothers weeks earlier. They climbed the ramp slowly, each step echoing. Claire Batu, a porter. "Mr. Nash, this is Dr. Donovan. We spoke on the phone." Silence. Then the mechanical sound of an electric wheelchair approaching. The door opened a crack, revealing a gaunt face marked by old pains and a dignity still intact. "You shouldn't be here," he said in an almost inaudible voice. They're watching this street." "We know," Vivian replied, "but we need your help, Mr. Nash. I am Colonel Vivian Ashford, daughter of Eleanor Ashford." A flash of recognition crossed his eyes. Little Vivian. My God in heaven. He looked outside nervously. "Come in quickly. Close the curtains." The room was simple, with family photos and Bible verses hanging on the walls. A hospital bed occupied a corner, surrounded by equipment and piles of medicine. Daniel positioned his chair next to a worn-out armchair. "Her mother was a woman of God," he said. "I used to come here every week after what happened. I would bring food, read the scriptures with me. She didn't deserve what they did to her grave last month." Vivian leaned forward. "Mr. Nash, we are building a federal case. We need your testimony." Fear crossed his face. "I can't. I signed papers. They made me promise." "Who made you promise that?" Claire asked softly. The old man took a deep breath. "Police Chief Vincent Thornton. He went to the hospital and said, 'If you open your mouth about what happened, your grandchildren will never be safe in this city.'" Vivian clenched her fists. "When was this?" 7 years ago, right after they killed my Mark." The tears came without warning. "My son wasn't even involved. He just saw what he shouldn't have coming home from work. The next day they planted drugs in his car. They said he died by hanging himself in his cell. But I saw the body. He didn't kill himself." Daniel's voice faded. "The boss told me if I had kept quiet, my other children would have lived. I stayed." Claire picked up her cell phone. "Mr. Nash, we can place you and your family in a federal witness protection program. We have direct contacts." He shook his head in despair. "You don't understand. The police chief controls everything. Judges, city councilors, even the state police. He has friends in Washington. My son tried to tell the truth, and look where he is now." Vivian began to walk around the room, the sound of her cane echoing on the floor. "I am not a local judge, Mr. Nash. I am an officer in the United States Army. I have contacts in the Department of Defense, in the Civil Rights Division, and among members of Congress. People that Vincent Thornton can't buy." Daniel remained silent for a few seconds, his gaze fixed on her. Then he maneuvered the chair to a bookshelf, picked up an old Bible, and opened it with trembling hands. From inside, he took out a thick brown paper envelope. "Your mother helped me hide this. She knew that one day someone would need this evidence." He handed over the envelope with the care of someone handing over their own soul. Photos, reports, copies of complaints, everything Mark collected before he was killed. Vivian opened the envelope. From inside, dozens of old photographs slid out, images of police brutality spanning decades. Police officers smiling in front of bloodied bodies, displaying batons like trophies. Those images, so realistic, seemed to breathe hatred. Vivian looked up. "Mr. Nash, this changes everything." And while holding the photos in the dim morning light, she knew she was about to ignite the spark that would set the entire city ablaze. Vincent Thornton's signature appeared repeatedly on falsified reports. Daniel was holding an old photograph. Younger police officers celebrating in a bar. "See here," he pointed, his voice breaking. "This is Thornton, back when he was just a sergeant. And look what they're holding." Vivian leaned forward. In the image, the men were holding up small leather wallets like trophies. "These are documents belonging to the victims," Daniel explained. "Wallets taken from the bodies of the men they beat to death." Dr. Claire Donovan photographed each image with her cell phone, with method and precision. "This evidence is very strong, but we need a formal statement to validate it in court," she said. "Mr. Nash, would you be willing to testify?" A loud bang interrupted the sentence. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the house. Something heavy crashed through the front window, scattering fragments everywhere. Vivian reacted instantly. Military instinct. "Get down!" She threw herself in front, shielding Daniel with her body, as more stones shattered the remaining glass. On the ground, she picked up one of the stones. Red letters, spray-painted on it, spelled out the word, "Shut up." Outside, tires screeched and an engine roared. Claire was already dialing the emergency number, but Vivian knew it was no use. Help would take a long time to arrive, if it came at all. "You need to go," said Daniel, his voice trembling. "They'll be back. Take the photos. Use what I gave you. But for God's sake, don't let them know it was me who took it." Vivian gathered the photos scattered on the floor, while Claire helped the man move to a back room, away from the broken windows. The wind whistled in through the cracks, scattering papers and torn curtains. "I'm going to send people to cover the windows and put private security here today," Vivian promised. "Go away, now!" he insisted. Before they left, he held Vivian's hand. "Your mother would be proud. She always said you would be the only one capable of breaking their power." Vivian nodded, thrilled, and ran to the pickup truck. The envelope containing the evidence was pressed tightly against his chest. As they drove off down Maple Street, the silence was absolute, but 3 blocks further on, 2 headlights lit up in the rearview mirror. "The same car from the courthouse," Claire said. "No license plate." The black sedan kept its distance, but followed every curve. Vivian gripped the steering wheel tightly. "Hold on tight." She made a sharp right turn, entering Jefferson Avenue. The headlights continued to follow them, relentless. "Call Dylan now," Vivian ordered. "Tell them to meet us at First Baptist Church." "And what about the car?" Claire asked. "Let them follow us. It's time to bring this war into the light." 30 minutes later, the First Baptist Church of Richmond was packed. The sound of voices and creaking wooden benches filled the temple. Entire families, elderly couples, young people with cell phones ready to broadcast live. The news had spread. Colonel Vivian Ashford was about to expose the system. At the altar, Dylan Monroe positioned his laptop and microphones. Some retired teachers and a small local businessman, discreet supporters, were among those present. Pastor Samuel Hayes fidgeted nervously in the chair next to the pulpit. He had begged Vivian to give up, warning her about the risks. But with half the congregation demanding the meeting, he could not deny the sacred space. Vivian looked at the clock. 7:58 p.m. Time to begin. That's when the back doors opened. Police Chief Vincent Thornton entered with 2 plainclothes officers. He leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, expression cold. Vivian did not back down. He ascended the pulpit, his uniform impeccable, his expression unwavering. The murmuring ceased. All that could be heard was the hum of the fluorescent lights. 3 nights ago, I was assaulted on an avenue in this city by police officers who swore to protect and serve. His voice echoed off the church walls. They didn't know who I was. They only saw what they wanted to see, like a black woman they could humiliate. A murmur of pain and recognition swept through the audience. They threw me in a cell. They thought they could silence me. She took a deep breath. But inside, I remembered what my mother used to tell me. "Daughter, dignity is not what they take from you. It's what they can never touch." "Amen!" shouted a voice from the crowd. "Hallelujah!" another replied. Vivian held up the envelope. "They tried to destroy me, but in doing so, they ripped off their own masks. Now we see them. Every crime covered up, every complaint ignored, every life crushed under the weight of the uniform and the silence." She took the photos out of the envelope and held them up under the church lights. "We have proof, we have witnesses, we have truths that have been buried for far too long." In the background, Thornton's face hardened. One of his men picked up the cell phone, whispering something. Vivian pointed to the crowd. "Look around. Every family here has a story. A brother beaten up in a police raid. A cousin arrested for resisting arrest. a father killed in custody, and the official version is always the same: natural causes. The audience murmured, moved, indignant. Dylan's eyes sparkled behind the camera. He nodded in affirmation. The broadcast was already live. Some people were wiping away tears, moved by Colonel Vivian Ashford's speech. "They count on our fear, on our silence," she said, stepping out from behind the pulpit, her firm voice growing like thunder. "They think we're going to keep looking the other way, swallowing their lies, accepting the boot on our necks." He paused, staring at the crowd. "But I didn't spend 20 years commanding troops and defending the principles of this country to see those principles die in my own city. I didn't achieve these stars to allow corrupt men to dishonor everything they represent." A loud round of applause began in the front rows and spread like wildfire. Soon the entire First Baptist Church was on its feet. Applause, tears, shouts of approval. Even some of the white allies were clapping, serious and convinced. "Today," Vivian declared with her fist raised, "we are no longer afraid. Today, we speak our truth. Today, we demand justice, not just for me, but for every victim of this sick system." The applause became deafening. Near the pulpit, Pastor Samuel Hayes slowly stood up. Silence fell over the church as he walked to the microphone. His voice faltered. "I've been silent for too long. I thought peace meant security. I thought that keeping quiet was the way to survive." He leaned heavily on the pulpit. "But today I understand. Silence is also a form of violence. Man, I won't be violent with my own people anymore." Tears streamed down the old shepherd's face. "This church is with Colonel Vivian Ashford. We demand justice, we demand truth, and we will not stop until each of these crimes is revealed." The crowd erupted again in applause and shouts of "Amen!" People hugged each other, raised their fists, and filmed with their cell phones. Dylan's laptop streamed everything live, while comments and shares multiplied on social media. In the background, Vincent Thornton was motionless. His face was a cold mask, but his eyes betrayed anger. Vivian stared at him serenely, a silent duel that said it all. One by one, people began to approach the microphone. A mother recounted how her son became paraplegic after a violent encounter. A man described years of humiliation. A white shopkeeper admitted to witnessing police brutality and remaining silent out of fear. Each story strengthened the crowd. Each truth robbed the lies of their power. Vivian watched the faces changing before her, fear giving way to courage, pain transforming into unity. That night was not just a protest. It was a collective rebirth. The meeting lasted for more than 2 hours, and nobody left. When the last testimony ended, Vivian returned to the podium. "This is just the beginning," he said. "We have more evidence, more witnesses, more voices willing to speak out. We will not be silenced. We will not back down. And we will not stop until every corrupt individual, every accomplice, faces justice." The entire church stood up. The sound of applause echoed like war drums. But Vivian kept her gaze fixed on Thornton, who was still leaning against the back wall. His expression was one of pure hatred and fear. Outside, the parking lot was bustling with activity. People exchanged phone numbers, made plans, and formed committees. The movement had begun. Vivian, Dylan, and Claire were standing beside the truck, talking in hushed voices. "The timing is perfect," Claire said, opening the leather briefcase. "I prepared emergency measures against the police department. We can file everything tomorrow morning." "My editors have already confirmed the cover story," Dylan added, typing on his cell phone. "Between the broadcast and the testimonies, they are trapped." Vivian watched the last cars leave, their red lights disappearing down the street. "Be careful, you two. Thornton won't let this go easily." "Let him try," Claire mocked. "We already have too much material." "Just the photos of your Nash are enough to bring down half the command." Dylan looked up, his expression serious. "Speaking of evidence, I'm meeting with a source tonight at midnight. a former dispatcher. She claims to have internal records that show the pattern of abuse. Vivian frowned. At midnight? Alone? She's terrified of being seen. She works the night shift at the municipal hospital. Dylan gave a half smile. It was the only possible time. Take someone with you, Vivian insisted. Absolutely not. She only talks to people in private. He looked at his watch. I'd better go. I'll meet her at the back of the industrial district. Vivian wanted to protest, but he was already walking towards the car. She watched the headlights recede into the distance, feeling the same knot in her stomach that had always warned her before an ambush. He'll be fine, Claire said, trying to sound confident. Come on now. I want to review the documents while having a coffee. The two of them went to a 24-hour diner on a busy avenue where the smell of fried food and bitter coffee mingled with the tension of the early morning hours. The white lights reflected off the legal documents scattered across the scribbled table. Claire spoke quickly, making plans. We're going to use everything. Violations of civil rights, excessive use of force, discrimination, obstruction of justice. They won't get away with it. Her cell phone vibrated. Soon after, Vivian's did too. Then both started vibrating non-stop, with dozens of simultaneous notifications. Claire looked at the screen. His face paled. My God, she whispered, and the following words came out almost without sound. Dylan. Colonel Vivian Ashford's voice echoed through the dark street as the sound of sirens cut through the silence. She and Dr. Claire Donovan ran out of the car, but the industrial district was already cordoned off by police vehicles and yellow tape. Red and blue lights flashed above the abandoned warehouses, reflecting on the wet asphalt. Through the gaps in the vehicles, Vivian saw a body lying on the ground, surrounded by paramedics. Dylan! He shouted, trying to move forward. A police officer blocked his path, extending his arm. This area is isolated, ma'am. No one enters. I am a colonel in the United States Army. This man is a friend of mine. The police officer let out a wry laugh. And I am the Pope. Restricted area. Go back to your car. Vivian stood paralyzed, her hands trembling with rage as she watched the ambulance speed away, Dylan's body being carried away in silence, covered up to his chest. The sound of the sirens faded, but the weight on her chest only increased. I'm going straight to the hospital, said Claire, already grabbing her car keys. Go ahead, I'll follow. Before they could get out, two vehicles appeared at speed. 4 police officers got out of the vehicle with their weapons drawn. Claire Donovan, one of them shouted. Hands up. What? What is that? She reacted, confused. You are under arrest for possession of narcotics with intent to distribute. This is absurd, Vivian shouted, stepping forward. She's a lawyer. Back off, Colonel, the policeman warned, aiming his weapon. Unless you want to get arrested too. They searched Claire's car, and seconds later one of the agents held up a plastic bag containing white powder with a satisfied smile. We found what we needed. You planted this, Vivian shouted. But they were already pushing her against the vehicle, forcibly handcuffing the lawyer. Vivian could only watch helplessly as they took Claire away in the police car. The lawyer's face was pressed against the window pane, her eyes wide with despair. Hours later, the sun was beginning to rise when Vivian arrived at her mother's old house, exhausted with a crumpled shirt and a hardened gaze. She turned on the television, looking for news about Dylan. But what she saw chilled her to the bone. Exclusive images show U.S. Army Colonel Vivian Ashford assaulting police officers during a routine stop. On screen, grainy images, clearly edited, showed only distorted snippets of the real scene. The moment she raised her hand, followed by the police officers retreating. Vivian's voice, out of context, echoed, "You don't know who you're messing with." The presenter read coldly, Sources connected to the Department of Defense have expressed concern about the colonel's behavior, suggesting emotional instability and possible abuse of power. Photos were flashing on the screen. Dylan Monroe, covered in blood, lay on the sidewalk. Claire Donovan was handcuffed. Protests with signs calling Vivian dangerous. Local authorities suggest that Ashford's inflammatory rhetoric may have incited violence during a religious gathering. Vivian sat down slowly on her mother's sofa. His face was motionless, but his eyes burned. The hope built in the church, the unity, the promises of justice, was being shattered before her eyes. The cell phone vibrated, a message from Aunt Gloria. "Channel 7, turn it on now." She changed the channel. New headline: Rebellious Colonel Threatens the Peace of Richmond. The same video, the same manipulation, the same lie. On screen, Police Chief Vincent Thornton appeared to be being interviewed. "Our role is to guarantee order. We regret the involvement of federal officers in actions that destabilize public safety." Vivian clenched her fists until the knots turned white. His cap felt as heavy as lead in his hands. The stars on his uniform, once symbols of honor, now seemed to carry shame imposed by those who held the power of the narrative. The Department of Defense has not yet commented on possible internal investigations. The presenter's voice was cold, mechanical. Vivian turned off the TV. The silence in the house was deafening. She stood up and looked at the uniform hanging on the hanger. That uniform was everything she had sacrificed to build, and now it was being used as a weapon against her. Shortly after 5 in the morning, Vivian drove through the still, dark city, her eyes fixed on the road. With each mile, his hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. At Richmond Municipal Hospital, the receptionist looked at her suspiciously, but upon seeing the uniform, directed her to the ICU. The sound of the heart monitors echoed like a countdown. Dylan lay motionless, his face covered in bruises, tubes in both arms. Vivian took a deep breath and sat down next to him in the cold, uncomfortable plastic chair. "I'm here, Dylan," she whispered, lightly touching his hand. "I'm fine here." His eyes opened slowly, confused. When he recognized her, he tried to smile, but the effort turned into a grimace of pain. "They really hurt me, didn't they?" she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Don't try to talk. The doctor said you have 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a severe concussion." He took a deep breath. "It was worth it." "What?" "The records. A Vos Deal Mal Saia. They're in my coat. They didn't find it." Vivian stood motionless for a moment. Then, without saying a word, he picked up the coat folded on the armchair, heavy. Inside, an envelope containing 2 hard drives stained with blood. The proof. All that was left. Everything they needed. She held the envelope against her chest, her gaze hard, and whispered, "Now it's my turn, Dylan. They thought they could bury me with lies, but I will unearth the truth, even if it costs me what's left of my life." Colonel Vivian Ashford's throat closed up. For a moment, she thought her heart had stopped. Dylan was still struggling to breathe, and even on the verge of unconsciousness, he could only think about the exams. "Dylan, I'm sorry. I should never have let you go alone." He opened his eyes, pain etched on his face. "Stop," he murmured, his voice a whisper. "It was my choice. It always has been." His breathing was weak and labored. "Don't let them win, Vivian. Never." She shook her head, trying to hold back tears. "Don't even think about it." He smiled slightly. "Let them win." His hand relaxed in hers. Vivian stood there, watching his chest rise and fall with difficulty, following each sound from the heart monitor, as if her own life were trapped in that rhythm. The sun was rising on the horizon when she finally left the hospital, walking slowly to the parking lot. The shadows of dawn stretched across the ground, long and silent. On the porch of the old house in the neighborhood, Aunt Gloria waited for her with an anxious look. "I saw the news, daughter," she said as Vivian climbed the steps. "What they're doing to you, it's cowardly." Inside, the air smelled of coffee and old memories. The faded curtains that Eleanor had hung decades before filtered the morning light, drawing golden stripes on the floor. Vivian sat down on her mother's old sofa, her body heavy, her soul even heavier. Aunt Gloria brought a steaming mug and placed it in her hands. "You need to stop this, Vivian," she said softly. "Look what they did to Dylan. Look what they did to that girl Claire. They won't hesitate to do worse." "I can't stop," Vivian replied, staring at her coffee without drinking it. "You know I can't. Your mother wouldn't want you to sacrifice yourself like this." The aunt's voice wavered. "She always said that sometimes surviving is knowing when to stay silent." Vivian placed the untouched cup on the table. "My mother survived so that I could do more than that." She looked up. "They beat me up in the street, Aunt. They framed Claire. They almost killed Dylan. How much quieter should I stay?" Aunt Gloria tried to answer, but the tears came first. "I buried your mother last week, Vivian. Don't make me bury you too." Vivian got up and went to the old rotary phone hanging on the wall, the one her mother had insisted on keeping and which she knew couldn't be tapped. He dialed a memory number. Colonel Michael Hargrove's firm voice answered on the second ring. "I was expecting your call. What's the situation like in Washington?" "Bad," he replied. "The Department of Defense is being pressured by senators. They want to open an investigation into his conduct. The body camera footage is on every news channel. They were tampered with, and you know it." "Of course I know," he sighed. "But what matters isn't the truth. It's the narrative. You're messing with big players, Vivian. The mayor has connections in Congress, and the police unions are funding all of this. So, am I supposed to let them win?" "No," he replied, his voice lower. "It's so you understand what you're dealing with. These people don't follow rules. They've already destroyed your reputation. Next time they might try something more permanent." The pause that followed was difficult. "Are you telling me to retreat, Colonel?" "I'm telling you to keep an eye on your back." The tone was grim. "I have information that they are considering definitive solutions to the problem called Vivian Ashford." From the crack in the door, Aunt Gloria could hear everything, her trembling hands covering her mouth. When Vivian hung up, the silence was almost physical. She walked into the room and stopped before the portrait of Eleanor Ashford hanging above the fireplace. The mother's eyes, steady, serene, almost alive, gazed at her. The same look that had always said without words, "Do not bow down." Vivian approached, speaking softly. "What would you do, Mom? What would you say if you saw what they did?" Memories filled the room. The mother bent over on the waxed floor of the mayor's house, enduring daily humiliations. The same woman who, with her salary as a domestic worker, saved every penny to pay for her daughter's college education. The same woman who, on the day of her military graduation, cried while holding her first lieutenant's insignia, saying, "Now our name carries respect." Vivian touched the portrait with her fingers. "You taught me to fight with dignity. Now I will fight for justice." Aunt Gloria approached, placing her trembling hand on her niece's shoulder. "Darling, please, we can't lose you too." Vivian squeezed her aunt's hand, but her eyes remained fixed on the portrait. "I'm not going to stop," he said, in a low but firm voice. "Not for me, nor for Dylan or Claire. But for every person they hurt, for every voice they silenced." He straightened his shoulders. "For you, Mom. For everything she couldn't say." The morning sunlight streamed through the window, bathing the portrait in gold. For a moment, Vivian thought she saw her mother's lips curving into a slight smile. Hours later, in the basement of the First Baptist Church, the sound of voices echoed softly. Vivian descended the wooden steps, the echo of her boots marking each step. Inside, a dozen military veterans awaited her, seated in folding chairs, their faces hardened by time. Some still wore camouflage jackets, while others carried only the weight of their military posture. Men and women who had served before, had lost before, and were now ready to serve again, not the government but the truth. Sergeant Miguel Torres, a veteran of 3 tours in Afghanistan, stood up as soon as Colonel Vivian Ashford entered the basement. "Colonel Ashford," he said, standing upright at attention. "Go ahead, Sergeant," she replied firmly. Vivian's gaze swept across the room. The space was cramped and stuffy, but the energy within pulsed like a collective heart. Each face bore the same expression, weariness and anger mixed with hope. "Thank you for coming. We've been following everything they're doing to you," Miguel said, his jaw clenched. "What they did to Dylan, to Claire. It's not right." Vivian pulled up a chair and sat down at their level, avoiding being too far from the command center. "What they did to me is just the tip of the iceberg." She opened Dylan's envelope and spread the documents out on the table. "This evidence reveals decades of abuse, cover-ups and deaths that were erased." Corporal Sarah Lewis, her prosthetic leg gleaming in the dim light, nodded. "My brother tried to report a violent police raid last year. Days later, they found drugs in his car. He lost his job, his reputation, everything." One by one, the veterans began to speak. A nephew was beaten during a police intervention. A cousin arrested based on a false accusation. A neighbor died after an accidental fall in a police van. Each account rekindled the same fire, that of indignation. Vivian took a deep breath. "We swore to defend the Constitution against all enemies external and internal. This oath doesn't end when we take off our uniforms." Miguel crossed his arms. "And what can we do, Colonel? They have the power, the press, the connections." Vivian leaned forward. "They are afraid," she said calmly, "and fear is their weapon. But we know how to face fear." The basement door creaked. Pastor Samuel Hayes descended the steps, followed by 3 elderly men with faces marked by time. "These gentlemen want to speak," said the pastor. The first one, Joseph Wilson, cleared his throat. 1985. "My son was coming home from work. They said he looked like a suspect. They beat him so badly that he never walked properly again. And when we tried to complain, they promised to come back and finish the job." The second reported the murder of his brother while in custody, which was recorded as a suicide. The third person spoke of a grandson who was arrested with fabricated evidence. The silence that followed was heavy. The veterans listened with clenched fists, their eyes burning. It was the same look of someone who has seen too much injustice to pretend not to understand. Pastor Samuel raised his voice. "The basement is yours. Whatever you need, this space is sacred." "It's time for this city to be held accountable." Sergeant Torres stood up. "Colonel, you have my support and my truck. I can help transport equipment and set up a base here." "I have my military amateur radio stored away," said Sarah. "We can create a secure communication network out of their reach." A retired paramedic volunteered to care for the injured. A retired former federal agent offered legal expertise. A quartermaster sergeant promised supplies. Therefore, the basement became a civil justice headquarters. Maps of Richmond were pasted on the walls, lines drawn in red pen indicating critical points, police stations, patrol routes. Vivian organized every detail with military precision. Teams, schedules, routes, and codes. "We are not here for revenge," she said. "We are here for justice. Everything needs to be legal, documented, and irrefutable. We're going to build a case they won't be able to bury. "They're going to come at us with everything they've got," Miguel warned. "Let them come," Vivian replied, looking at each face present. "This time we are ready. This time we're in this together." As the night wore on, the basement became increasingly crowded. Mothers who had lost children arrived, workers who witnessed corruption, nurses with files on accidental injuries, former public employees with copies of falsified reports. Each person brought a piece of the puzzle. Each story was a spark of truth. Pastor Samuel walked among them, murmuring words of faith. For a long time, we confused peace with silence. But true faith requires action, and today, action is our prayer. Shortly after midnight, Vivian went upstairs in search of fresh air. When she pushed the door open, she stopped, breathless. The churchyard was packed with people, men, women, young people, old people. Each person held a lit candle, its flames flickering in the calm night. The scene was almost supernatural, a sea of lights against the darkness. Mrs. Joanna Wells, the owner of a neighborhood diner, approached with a smile. "We heard you were meeting here, Colonel. We wanted you to know that you are no longer alone." Vivian looked around, the glow of the candles reflecting in tired but strong eyes, and for the first time in many days, she allowed herself to take a deep breath. The candlelight illuminated faces of all ages and colors. There were workers in uniforms stained with grease, ladies with headscarves, young people with cell phones in hand, and veterans in faded military jackets. Vivian Ashford recognized some faces: neighbors, longtime members of her mother's church. Others were strangers, but they all shared the same expression: quiet determination. An elderly lady, Mrs. Esther Barnes, approached with the candle flickering between her wrinkled fingers. "Your mother would be so proud, Colonel," she said softly. "Proud to see you standing here, fighting." Vivian stood on the steps of the First Baptist Church of Richmond, surrounded by the golden glow of dozens of flames. The night air smelled of wax and hope, and for the first time since the attack, she felt the weight on her shoulders ease a little. Those people, his people, had found courage. They had found their voice. The sails burned steadily against the wind, like living promises. Each flame seemed to whisper the same message: "We are here, we are watching, and we will no longer remain silent." At Richmond Municipal Hospital, Dylan Monroe lay under the cold light of the monitors. His face was still swollen, with purplish bruises under his eyes. Tubes protruded from his arms, and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor filled the room. "You look terrible, Dylan," Vivian said, trying to smile as she sat down next to him. He offered a pained half-smile. "You should have seen the others." The voice was hoarse. "Although I didn't see them. Cowards got me from behind." Vivian clenched her fist. "We're going to find out who did this and who ordered it. No need to guess. Thornton's fingerprints are all over it." "Not literally. He's too smart for that. But it was his men." A nurse came in, checked the vital signs, and left silently. As soon as the door closed, Dylan shifted in bed, lowering his voice. "Before they attacked me, I hid something. In an old mausoleum, in the city cemetery, the old wing." Vivian leaned forward. "What, a USB drive?" "Everything I've gathered over the last 5 years," he breathed deeply. "Raw footage from police car cameras showing beatings. Audio recordings of police officers bragging about planting evidence, financial reports." He paused. "Evidence of bribery between Thornton, Mayor Nathan Caldwell, and Horizon Gate Correctional Management. They receive money for each prisoner, more prisons, more profit, and the city politicians get their cut." The heart monitor's heart rate increased. "The whole system is a machine for grinding people down. They are profiting from the suffering of our people." Vivian held his hand firmly. "Stay calm. Save your strength." Behind the mausoleum, bottom right corner, loose brick. "If they find it first, it's over. But if you get there first, there's hope." "I'll get it, Dylan, I promise. Be careful." They know I had something. That's why they came after me. The monitor's beeping has returned to its normal rhythm. She watched him close his eyes, his chest rising slowly. Shortly after, Vivian left through the side entrance of the hospital, keeping her cap pulled down. I knew I was being watched. Richmond veterans had spotted 3 unmarked cars in the vicinity, but they had also set up their own counter-surveillance network. Sergeant Miguel Torres's pickup truck was parked on a nearby corner, ready to intervene if necessary. The cemetery was silent in the stifling heat of the late afternoon. Vivian walked slowly, each step calculated, seeming like just another visitor paying homage. The crickets were chirping, and the air smelled of damp earth and wilted flowers. The old mausoleum of a traditional family stood atop a small hill, its marble stained and cracked by time. Vivian knelt before him, clasping her hands as if in prayer, and discreetly felt the base of the wall. His fingers found the loose brick, exactly as Dylan had described. Behind him, the USB drive was wrapped in plastic. She slipped it into her pocket, her heart pounding. But then, footsteps echoed on the gravel behind her. "Paying homage, Colonel?" The voice was filled with false courtesy and venom. Vincent Thornton emerged from the shadows, his hands clasped behind his back, accompanied by 2 armed police officers. Vivian stood up slowly, maintaining a calm tone. "My mother is buried here. Or have you forgotten that your men desecrated her grave?" Thornton smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "A terrible tragedy. Unfortunately, there is no solution. But speaking of unsolved crimes, we are all very concerned about Mr. Monroe. Any idea what he was doing to attract so much violence? Ask yourself, boss. It seems you have a theory for everything in this city." He took a step forward, his voice low and sharp. "I'm just trying to keep the peace, Colonel. But there are those who insist on stirring up what should remain buried, like poor Mr. Monroe. What a pity what happened to him." Vivian kept her gaze fixed. "Nothing stays buried forever, boss. Not even the truth. Not even fear." She walked past him, controlling the urge to quicken her pace. The sound of boots echoed among the graves, the wind rustling through the dry trees. "Some things should remain buried, Colonel," Thornton said coldly behind her. "For the good of all." Vivian did not respond, but in his pocket, Dylan's flash drive seemed to throb with the weight of truth, living proof of a system she vowed to overthrow, even if she had to do it alone. The sky over Richmond dawned heavy and grey, as if even the clouds knew what was to come. In the side room of the First Baptist Church, Colonel Vivian Ashford held the flash drive between her fingers, the small artifact that was now worth more than any medal. Around him, veterans, mothers, teachers and volunteers waited in silence. Sergeant Miguel Torres was standing next to an old laptop connected by cables and makeshift antennas. "It's ready, Colonel. As soon as you authorize it, it will air on every channel we can hack into. Radio stations, local broadcasts, social media, everything." Vivian took a deep breath. "So now is the time." She nodded. Torres pressed the enter key. The screen flickered and the video began to play. Recordings from police cars, raw, uncut footage, showed police officers beating defenseless citizens, planting drugs, and laughing while handcuffing young black men. Next came the voice recordings. Vincent Thornton negotiating bribes, Mayor Nathan Caldwell securing multi-million-dollar contracts for Horizon Gate Correctional Management. The city came to a standstill. Televisions in bars, screens in squares, even some panels on buses displayed the images. The truth they had tried to bury was now marching through the streets, alive, burning, undeniable. But while the people witnessed what they had always suspected, the machinery of power reacted. Sirens blared, vehicles converged on the church. Inside, Vivian remained composed. "They're here to silence us," said Corporal Sarah Lewis, radio in hand. "Let them come," Vivian replied. "The truth has already left here." The first police car braked in front of the church. Their headlights cut through the darkness of dawn. Men in tactical vests surrounded the building. Vivian looked around, determined faces, steady eyes, and she understood that she was no longer alone. "You remember the oath," he said, "to serve, protect, and fight for justice, even when the enemy wears the same uniform." Miguel stood in front of the door, the radio buzzing with intercepted transmissions. "They're calling for reinforcements, Colonel. They want to cut the power." "Then light the candles," said Vivian. Within seconds, the basement was engulfed in dozens of flames, the same candles that days before had illuminated the people. The warm glow reflected off the walls, covered in maps and files, as if each flame were a symbol of resistance. Outside, Pastor Samuel Hayes appeared on the church steps, Bible in hand and courage in his eyes. "You're not going to come here to destroy more lives. This place is sacred, and the people of this city have awakened." Behind him, residents began to gather, hundreds, then thousands, ordinary people, workers, mothers with children in their arms, everyone shouting the same slogan, "Justice! Justice!" The police officers hesitated. The crowd advanced without weapons, only with voices and raised cell phones. The pressure from the cameras was stronger than any bullet. Vivian left the church slowly, her uniform immaculate, her face serene despite the danger. "Chief Thornton!" he shouted. He turned around, his face pale in the dawn light. "If you believe you can erase the truth, look around." She pointed to the crowd. "These people are your court now. And I am merely the messenger." He tried to answer, but before he could speak, different sirens blared. Federal vehicles and black cars advanced down the main street. Federal agents descended in formation. Vincent Thornton and Nathan Caldwell are in jail for bribery, contract fraud, and abuse of power. The local police retreated, confused. Vivian watched as Thornton was handcuffed. His cold, venomous gaze met hers one last time. "This doesn't end here, Colonel." "I know," he replied, "but you're not in charge here anymore either." When it was all over, the streets were covered in makeshift posters. "Richmond will not be silent. Justice for Dylan and Claire." The truth prevailed. That night, the entire country watched the images broadcast on national television. The evidence found on the pen drive triggered a wide-ranging operation, arrests of corrupt businessmen, mayors, and officials in several cities. The courage of an officer who refused to bow her head became headline news and an inspiration. At the hospital, Dylan watched the images on the television in his room. When he saw Vivian on the screen, next to the American flag, he smiled with chapped lips. "I told you," he murmured, "they weren't going to win." Days later, under a clear blue sky, Vivian walked to the cemetery. She carried simple flowers, daisies, Eleanor Ashford's favorites. He placed them on the tomb and remained silent. "It's done, Mom." They tried to bury the truth, but it blossomed. The wind gently rustled the leaves of the trees as if in response. She straightened her body, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The uniform still marked by the fighting, but the uniform is lighter. Behind her, a new generation of young people and veterans gathered in a downtown square, organizing community watch groups and providing free legal support. The movement that began in the church basement was now spreading like a living network. At sunset, a press conference was broadcast live. Colonel Vivian Ashford appeared before the cameras without makeup, without rehearsed speeches. "I did not fight against men. I fought against fear, against silence, against oblivion. And I learned that justice is not a burden, it's an inheritance. And today she returns to those who have always owned her, the people." The camera lights reflected in his eyes, and for a moment the whole country seemed to be listening. "They tried to bury us, but they forgot that we are seeds." As the crowd cheered, the relit candles in the people's hands reminded everyone that the flame of truth, the one that started in a small church, it would never be erased again. This story is about courage, truth, and the price one pays for not remaining silent. It shows that justice, however late it may seem, is born when someone has the strength to stand up, even alone, and say, "Enough." Vivian confronted a system that many considered untouchable and proved that dignity is a more powerful weapon than any uniform or position. It is a reminder that silence protects the powerful, but the word, when guided by truth, liberates those who have been oppressed. Now I want to know from you, where are you watching this story from? Comment below with the name of your city or country. I want to see how far this message has reached. If this story touched you in any way, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Here every week you will find stories that reveal the power of truth, courage, and justice.